Usually on Halloween, people dress up. On this Halloween, I feel like taking my entire, dress up off. What I mean by that is I just want to speak to you, not as a channeler, not as a reader, but as the person behind the reader, if that makes sense. As readers, we don't often actually have this opportunity or take it, okay? There are a few risks we run. These risks are like, firstly, the algorithm won't know what to do with this particular video that I'm sharing with you. And secondly, you may remember some of the things I say and never be able to unhear them as you listen to my readings. As I say this, I realize that perhaps even just this discussion will shift how I read, okay? And so I just feel called to do this, and so I'm going to do it. Just to give you some context on who I am. I am a mother of two. I have a YouTube channel where I read cards, and I have not really been aware my entire life that I'm a psychic. Looking back, I can see that, okay, and also from speaking to friends, let's say that I was not really in touch with for many years that remember how I was when I was younger. Through that contact, I've been able to realize that a lot of people kind of could sense who I was before I forgot who I was, if that makes sense. I have a background in property, okay, and so I spent a long time in corporate. A lot of my career was in corporate. I've studied that kind of thing, and I came across card reading by sitting with a psychic that told me that I'm a healer and I should lean into oracle cards. And so I bought myself a deck or 2 or 3, and I'd sit with them by my bedside and read them. And they used to really annoy the heck out of me because there was one card that kept popping up. This card would tell me to look at this thing that's been bothering me and stop ignoring it. And so I stopped reading the cards for a while because I was just like, this is so annoying. And then a series of towers happened to me, if you know what I mean. And that's when my life started to change quite drastically. But in a weird way, I was grateful because these towers were sort of unshackling me from a life I no longer connected with, a life that no longer resonated with me. And I realized after some time that I was creating these towers, okay, through really connecting with the reality of how I was feeling about a number of things in my life, how they don't align, looking ahead at the trajectory of my life, not being satisfied with that trajectory, and actually just wishing for a change, not actually consciously wishing for it. The change started happening. When I reflect on my relationship with cards, I now realize that, reading for myself felt distant, but the information was always there. The difference was that through time and through really getting realistic with myself and, taking the rose-colored glasses off, the truth was always there. It was me that was far from it, okay? And so the more I started listening to what I was receiving from the cards, the more I was able to read the cards and actually trust what they were saying. And so what I mean by that is sort of that distance between me and the truth that the cards were sharing with me started narrowing. Over time and in the background of all of this, things continued to shift in my life. But when I look at all of it, I realize that nothing has actually changed in terms of my relationship with cards. That gap, okay, between what I want to see and what I'm seeing being the truth, is the gap of integration. I like to speak about integration as the process of applying all the things that you're learning, okay? And so the opposite of integration would be to not apply the things that you're learning. The thing is here, there are so many readers out there, and I want to share my experience as a human being who listens to other readings. More and more, I'll say to you that I'm unable to listen to other readings. Okay, there are very few readers I can listen to. I also listen for very different reasons. I've also gone through so many stages with listening to other readers and getting angry with other readers for various reasons, for the confusion that they bring me. Okay, and that's all about me, I'm aware. Getting irritated for all the things they don't do, all the things they don't say. Okay, whether that is about who they are or whether that is because of like how they've created their businesses, all of that. I mean, just as a human being, these are the things that over time have annoyed me. Just to bridge another gap that I'm feeling, okay? I really seriously used to suffer from an addiction of listening to love readings. It's interesting to say this with such clarity now because it's unclear to me when I stopped listening to them. I actually wonder whether some of these channels still exist because they just don't show up on my algorithm. And the ones that I do remember, whenever I go in to listen, I find I get this weird, buzzing, silent rumbling in my right ear. It's like a tapping, okay? It is grueling. I cannot listen. And this is not to absolutely every one of them. This is to the ones, and I've just come to understand this. This is to the ones where I know, my system knows, okay, the masculine within me has created a boundary to say that reader and their readings no longer resonate with the flow that we are in. And a lot of the things and the reasons they do the things they do just do not resonate with where we are. I had to spend a lot of time really unpacking this for myself. Also to shed some of this anger and this rage that I'd feel because I was doing things a certain way and struggling in my own ways, let's say, to survive off this channel or whatever it is that I'm dealing with in my life's reality versus how they were, in a sense, and in my sense of judgment, getting away with doing what they do, how they do it, in ways that I was perceiving as wrong. Okay, so this is me judging them. That is right, that is wrong, all of that. Still in a space where I'm trying to figure out whether what I'm doing is right or wrong. You know, this experience is multi-layered. And to bring this back, the reason I spoke of integration is because standing where I am standing now, today, I realize that all of that judgment that I've casted upon other people is really about what I was going through, okay? I cannot be the judge of the gap that they have of integration. I can't be that judge. It is also like near impossible for me to figure out their level of awareness. I used to have this understanding that says that the more psychic you are, the more aware you are. The reason I came to this is because my psychic ability has refined and become more clarified through integration. What I've learned, okay, is that we are all so different. The reasons why we land in the work that we've landed in are so different. Our realities are different. Our looking glasses are different. The things we're here to learn are different. And so this entire world of readers is so dynamic, which means that to stop and judge another person and their work, their style, their truth, how they do things is a huge mistake on my part. With that said, there are readers that I do listen to, that I can listen to right now, where sometimes I recognize, I'm seeing this now from where I'm standing, I recognize that they are very vocal about judging how other people do things. And I'm observing this during a time where I have released judgment on all other readers, because I've just accepted and surrendered to the fact that I will never know everything. I'm not meant to know everything. What I'm meant to get to know is myself. There are times where I even find myself feeling really grateful for these readers, okay? The ones who do things even the way I don't think they should be done. All of them, I revere them. Why? Because they sort of have a way of handing me back my license to freedom, to do what I want, okay? Because they're doing what they want. And the fact that I'm not doing what I want, okay, and that I have a gap between what I want to do and what they're doing, that kind of is really a mirror to me as to like how much I have shackled myself. One of the things that has been my greatest gift here on Pyramid Energy, and I want to say also my greatest curse, is that you, the audience that I read for, okay, you also are always evolving, new people coming in, some people who've been around leaving, all of that. You know, as the reader of the energy, I feel all of these shifts. They may not occur to me as dynamics around individuals, but it's like this collective energy feels like a house with many rooms, okay? And sometimes it feels like a mansion with many rooms. Sometimes it just feels like a little cozy house with a number of rooms. That's kind of how the channel feels to me now. Let me call it like a 5-bedroom house where I can move through all the rooms, all the corridors. I have a key to every single one of them. Sometimes there are rooms I keep locked. Some rooms I keep with the doors wide open so that people in room number 2 can move into room number 3 and whatever. You know, I don't have full control over this house, but I do have full access. There are some rooms that are like below ground level that I sometimes fear visiting. There are some rooms where I feel like, oh, I should have locked that door. You know, it feels like that. With that said, there is a room in this house that I read for that also has access to all of the corridors. How I would describe this particular individual, if I were to like describe an avatar of this individual as a representation of this portion of the collective that I read for, is someone highly evolved, okay? Someone very experienced. Someone who perhaps has always been psychic, very well read, okay? That is able to observe me as the reader, okay? Listens out of interest and for a sense of community. This is interesting what I'm going into now. Listens for a sense of community and to observe what is happening. Okay, so I would say this person feels like just a watcher who has seen all of these various movements amongst people in the collective. As a reader, and I'm going to speak on behalf of other readers, you know, I'm just going to use my license to speak here. I want to say that sometimes as readers, we think we're the most evolved, okay? We think we can be the judge of things because we're seers, because we read, okay? When actually, there are other people who this just comes naturally to. There are other people who figured out so many of these things long ago, okay? Just because readers have grown and this industry on YouTube has completely boomed in the last few years doesn't mean that these truths are new, okay? And so as I evolve from a more personal level, as I evolve as a reader, as a psychic, as a human being through this like human experience where I sometimes feel like an alien and then sometimes I feel like a pound of flesh. I've gone through these multiple ascensions that can lead me and my ego to believe that I am standing on the front line, okay? When actually someone else is looking at me, watching my experience and watching my unfolding with a full view, possibly of even where I'm headed. And it's a strange experience to consider this because they are probably aware that where I am headed is where I choose to head. And with all this said, there is probably another room that watches me as I read and as I do things here, thinking to themselves, oh, she should just do this like this, and she should do this like that. And, you know, she's totally robbing herself in this way and that way. Okay? I think what I'm actually saying here is there are times where you can feel all of these eyes on you. Okay? And then obviously there are many rooms full of people who are purely here for the guidance. Some feel like identical to me. Some feel like an evil twin. Okay. Some feel, I don't even know what I mean by that. I mean like, you know, someone you completely resonate with, but there are some things they say that are really triggering to you. So you really identify with them, but here and there, there'll be things where you're like, that's in the wrong place. That, you know, that kind of feeling, not really evil. I don't mean it like in such a negative way. You love them, but there's some things you just like, oh. So I believe that that happens too. And I'm just sharing that with, there are these eyes that I do feel on me, mostly so much love, especially in the last 2 months, especially. The love has always been there, but especially in the last 2 months, as I have connected with a deeper sense of reverence for myself, I've been able to really feel the reverence for me, if that makes sense. The reason I'm speaking about all of this is because of my interactions in the comments, okay? The comments are like only a portion of the feedback that I get as a reader. Perhaps some of you, you might sometimes ask yourselves who else listens to the channel. From where I'm standing, I've become aware that there are people that never comment on the channel and you'll only realize they exist or listen to you either through a donation or because they go onto Patreon or because they ask for a personal reading or because they happen to follow on Instagram or whatever. Not everyone comments here on YouTube. Some have really surprised me. Some of these different types of listeners are felt, and some I become aware of, you know, in terms of interactions. There are writers, there are academics, there are traders of Bitcoin. There's one guy who's an MMA fighter. There are many types of healers who have YouTube channels. There are people that don't have a YouTube platform. They're on Instagram. There are people who don't actually do actual healing work. and they just connect because they're living their lives like every other person, and they just want to deepen their intuition. People with a very deep inner world, okay? And I'm saying this because it's important to recognize as you listen, and I've had to do the same. As I listen to my own readings, I interpret them a certain way. Every other person who's listening interprets it in their own way. And so there are times when I see comments with questions. Some are more technical questions that are easy for me to answer, but others come across as questions, and I'm not saying don't ask them, but others come across as questions as though the information that I have shared has said something very particular to that person, something I can't see, okay? So I've said something that I don't really have a full understanding of in terms of how that's been interpreted or received. And so a person will take what I've read and apply it to the context of their lives, and then ask me a question on that basis. And then I get a bit lost. There are also times where I see a comment and I recognize that Gontse 18 months ago would have interpreted those words the same way. And Gontse now realizes there's a danger in interpreting what I've said in that way. But at the same time, I am aware that I need to allow that person to experience their interpretation in their lives in that way for a time, because that's where they are. I'm unable to bridge that gap for them because, I've had to walk that long walk to get to where I am now. That's not to say that it will take them a really long time to walk to where I am now. And it's actually not even to say that that's where they want to land, where I am now. Again, I cannot be the judge of their path. And so I see these things, but I don't do anything about them because I really have a respect for the life that you walk, the decisions that you make for the time that you're in. And so if someone is still listening to, let's say, love readings that I can no longer listen to, that's not for me to judge, because my journey through my own, and I'm not saying you have an addiction, but for me it was an addiction. It was an addiction because I recognized along the way that I need to pull away from the stuff. It's no longer good for me, and it's keeping me in a loop. It doesn't mean it keeps everyone in a loop. It's keeping me in a loop. And every time I hear these promises of this stuff coming together, I cling to that promise, which is actually causing a bad reaction on this thing coming into fruition. And so I've had to detangle myself from all of this. But at the same time, because I read for this collective, where there are people that are in that room that I feel very connected to, because I have been in that room of this house. And by that I mean, I'm familiar with what it feels like to be in that tangle. I'm aware what it feels like. I can feel the disappointments. I can feel the yearning. I can feel the limerence. I know what it feels like because I have lived in that energy. I have lived with it in my cells and my flesh. And so when it comes up in an energy, I can feel it. Okay. And I can feel when it's about to break out, and I can feel when it gets pulled back. There was a time, it feels like a few months ago, where I really battled with this, because what would happen is that I would come and open a container to read for the collective, and I was going through a time where I really wanted to create a rhythm in my readings and a sense of consistency to be able to show up for myself by showing up for you. And I was really struggling because every time I opened the container, this energy would pull at me, to give answers to all these questions that were coming up. And so what I would feel is the fatigue and the drain of this process taking place. And I remember having to make a really firm decision with myself to remain dedicated to my highest potential. Okay. In staying faithful to myself and in staying faithful to the channel. Okay. And all of those wanting to ascend. I had to make this decision to keep myself anchored, not to ignore what actually, to a point, it did feel like I needed to ignore it. Okay. But I realized that I couldn't ignore it. What I had to rather do is stay dedicated and speak to spirit to ask me to put me in those readings that reflect my highest potential. With that, to me, that felt like a fork in the road. A fork in the road where I could feel, let's say to the left end, I would be holding the anchor, but to the right end, I would still remain aware. And I'm recognizing that my voice is shaking as I say this, but I would remain aware of what it feels like to want the information to continue along this road that I'd been reading for and carrying. In a sense, it would feel like, the other day I was walking with my children and my daughter was holding my hand. She insisted on holding my hand, and it was a fast walk. It wasn't a slow walk. And at some point she started getting scared of the dogs barking, and I'm like, they're behind the gates or whatever. But then, this feeling of wanting to walk with your child, holding their hand so that they feel safe, but letting them know we're walking fast. And so if you want to come on this walk with me, you're going to have to keep up, because otherwise your little hand is dragging me backwards, and it's making the walk less pleasurable. It's making the walk harder. Okay. So I know I'm right here next to you. Oh, you can hold my hand, but we're walking, we're moving. Okay. It doesn't mean I don't love my daughter. It doesn't mean I don't want to walk with her, but it does mean that in order for me to, get what I want to get out of this walk, as much as I love doing it with my daughter, I am willing to not do that walk with her, if that's what it means. And that is because the reason I do the walk is to clear my mind and to clear the energy in my body. And one of the benefits of that is that I get to show up as a better mother. And so even though I want to walk with her, I may need to leave her at home where she doesn't have to keep tugging me backwards and making the walk less pleasurable for her as well. Because when she's ready to walk with me, she'll find me on my walk and we'll walk together. I want to come back to this idea of right and wrong. Okay. It feels like it's coming up, and it is it feels like the reason I even came on today to share all of this information, which I think you'll all pick up various things, and maybe you'll all have a better understanding of the meaning of what I've shared than I feel I have at this point. But, I felt called to just come and share as myself. No reading, no, just what it's like in my experience. As a holder of space, but also recognizing that the space I hold is also held for myself, okay, and is also held by all of you, okay. Together we create this container, and I am a facilitator of this container to an extent, okay. I do have I get to decide a lot of things here. I think for me, one of the biggest messages I have today is that it's so important to listen to your own voice. It's so important to listen to your own voice, because when you don't, all of these readings become a source of confusion in your life. They become a source of doubt. Then you'll start comparing what you're hearing in various places and trying to sort through it like a puzzle, when what I'm going to tell you about this puzzle, let's say it's a 1,000-piece puzzle, you might, you might be dealing with one of those cases where pieces from other boxes have landed on the table, which means that you got to have a really good sense of which puzzle pieces belong in the right box, in your box. Otherwise, you might be solving for a very long time, and you might find yourself getting really angry at various pieces for not looking clear. Okay, like when you putting those little pieces of the sky together, and then like some are just all blue, and you're like, and then one has a random streak of cloud, and then it can get so frustrating where you feel like, did they even pack this box correctly? Okay, it can get that frustrating. And what I'll tell you is, on the other side of that kind of confusion, once you've gathered the pieces of yourself and realize that, okay, you get to create your own box with your own pieces and your own puzzle, okay, your own puzzle to muddle up and put back together. That's sometimes how I feel now. You'll recognize that some of those puzzle makers or pieces in the puzzle didn't even know that they were on your table, if you know what I mean. What I mean is, some of the readers, let's say, that I was angry with before for doing things that, let's say, I don't believe in, they're not even aware I exist. They just carry on. And then, let's say I move on a whole year later, I go back and peer into their house, and they're just carrying on as usual, and nothing is going wrong for them. They're just carrying on as usual, doing what they've been doing for 5 years, happy with it, completely at peace with what they're doing. The fact that I was in a zone of not having peace with myself and not having peace with what they were doing, and that I've been able to grow beyond that, has absolutely no bearing on their experience. And that's what I mean. I mean, this reverence I have for them is they're doing what they want. They're doing what their spirit is telling them to do. They're doing what makes sense to them. Okay. Having evolved in my own way and feeling like this multi-dimensional being with awareness that is able to transcend levels through the sky and levels through the ground and the ocean. That's sometimes how I feel. I feel like the more depth that I gain, the more responsibility I hold to myself. And it's important for me to stay anchored where I want to be and where I want to go, rather than scattered across these places asking myself why things are being done in all those ways. There are times where it's healthy for me to ask myself these questions, to use these places and these people and these things as mirrors, but I become stifled when I get stuck there and wish they would change rather than changing myself. I want to say I was brought up lukewarm Christian. This is no offense to the people who brought me up, my family, my parents, no offense at all. But it just means that I grew up within this traditional Anglican structure where I was baptized, I got confirmed, all of that, and would go to church when I had to, listen to everything that was recited, but never really absorbed any of it, to becoming a tarot card reader, oracle card reader, who along the way started encountering Bible verses in a very, very interesting way that feels super true to me, more true to me than anything I'd heard recited in my past. I feel like the Bible has found me as a very interestingly true form of literature that I've found I can rely on when my spirit sends me to specific places in it. And so because I was not familiar with the text before, I've found that most of my own religious trauma that I've had to heal has been around my relationship with money, okay, and my relationship with this idea of cleanliness in one's life. A lot of these things, you hear about them, like what it means to be Christian and all of that. And through really feeling held by God first, and then engaging with certain texts, I haven't had to unravel what those texts mean, if you know what I'm saying. However, of late, what I've found creeping up on me is really, again, this is an existential topic, but the idea of my own freedom and who I am and who I want to become, okay? Through these readings that I do here on pyramid energy, pyramid energy is like the process of my becoming, okay? I have shifted in a very short space of time to really coming to a truth that for a long time was daunting for me to realize, okay, or accept, being that I am creating my life, okay? To hear this is easy, but to really apply it during a time of your life where you're deciding what you want to create, okay? Because when you look into tomorrow, all you see is black. All you see is black, and so I get to choose what it is I want to do with each container that I create. Someone like me tends to, my family used to always call, they still do, they call me, it's not even an English word, but it's a word that refers to one of those really big trucks that have that huge label that says abnormal vehicle on it. And like, so when it needs to turn around, all traffic needs to stop. It's like a 15-point turn, and this vehicle's just abnormally large, and it takes it a really long time to change direction. This is just how I've always been. With that said, change has always been a part of me, okay? A predictable life comes across to me as incredibly boring, okay? I never want to feel numb. This feels like a bit of a paradox, because I'm constantly wishing for consistency when consistency is what I can't stand. And so often I'm like, I feel like I'm cruising and I'm doing readings and I'm like in a rhythm, but then I get bored. This literally happens to me so often, and I don't get to talk about it. And so lately, I've really gone back to myself to ask myself, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? Okay, so it's possible that, you know, my next reading is just like what I've been doing. You'll feel the changes in a different way on your end. But I'm bringing this up because there's this idea of right and wrong. Okay, there's this idea of right and wrong. You'll see that I have a Patreon link to extended readings and some like particular products that I've created over time. These are really nice because it takes a reader, let's say 40 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour to create one recording, and then you get to sell it, and you keep making money on something that, you know, you made long ago and you're no longer sweating for. At the time, this was really appealing when I was creating these extended readings. But then over time, it started to clash with my beliefs, because my beliefs were shifting. The idea of selling stuff was shifting for me, which is interesting because when I started here on YouTube, it was my wish to do this. It was my wish to get to the point where I can sell extendeds, make money on them or whatever. But so much has shifted. So much has shifted. People that listen to me, a lot of people that listen to me where I am, I get the sense that it doesn't actually make sense to them to pay for these things because they have such close and intimate access to their own intuition. And so very much as you go along, you might think you're a teacher. You might think you're a healer. You might think you're a great reader. But in reality, you're an entertainer. Because whether you exist on YouTube or not, whether you share your work or not, people will evolve. And so it's a very tricky relationship, this thing of figuring out where your value lies in what you're doing, whether you're over-invested in one area, one space or not. And then it's sort of a tug of war between asking yourself these questions and also just getting on with it and doing what you love doing. It tends to be a very scary idea for me to play with, this idea of you're creating your life. It's scary because it puts me on the spot. It means that what I used to, the responsibility I used to assign to God to sort everything out, that idea is becoming, it feels wishy-washy. I still believe in God, but my understanding of God has really shifted because it's as if one has to find a balance between the God self and the omnipotent version of God, which actually, the gap between those two versions of your understanding of God are really around your appetite for freedom. If I were to describe my style here on Pyramid Energy, as compared to other readers, I would say, I don't do love readings here. That's how I'd put it. Okay. I'd have to unpack that because a lot of my readings could be shared in the form of love reading. It could be packaged as love readings. Okay. Because love is an energy. It is not necessarily something that happens between a man and a woman, or a man and a woman and a woman. I mean, however many combinations we have, love is an energy. And so within me, there is love. Within me, there is a masculine and a feminine. And, you know, within me, there's this ability to create, through very romantic ways that I find to be romantic. Okay. This is my style. I enjoy that this is reflected through my tone. Okay. And my tone has evolved as well, but there is a romance that can sometimes be heard in my tone. Sometimes a sense of authority, which I don't usually carry in my day-to-day life. Okay. It's coming in more and more. I'm integrating more pyramid energy into Gontse and more Gontse into pyramid energy. These two aspects of me are starting to become one, which is very interesting because in the early stages of pyramid energy used to completely like overwhelm Gontse. I used to listen to pyramid energy and I was like, what the? I used to listen and I used to ask myself, what is pyramid energy? What is pyramid energy? Like, who is the spirit guide? Who is sharing this information? And that tone and that voice. And I'd be freaked, you know. I'd be freaked, quite honestly. I also started growing this like deep respect for pyramid energy, as if it wasn't me. And I mean, this might be weird for you to hear because, and I don't know if you're new on the channel or if you've been listening for a long time, but I wish I could share the way, like, I suppose my own persona, the way I'm speaking to you now, has evolved since before pyramid energy. And so I can't give you that, sort of show you that comparison now, but I'm just sharing, and I would never have been like, I wouldn't have had the courage to share that I was that freaked about pyramid energy then compared to now. Whereas now I'm realizing, no, pyramid energy is what I created. Pyramid energy can become whatever I want it to become. And that is what is daunting. The idea that you can create whatever it is you want to create. The idea that what you want to create might be so large, too large for your ego to digest, that your ego will allow you to believe that it is not you that is creating what you're creating. Until one day you're standing at, I'd say, a level and depth of embodiment that no longer allows you to deny that it is all you. Which then becomes the explanation as to why you feel stagnant, and becomes that mirror right up against yourself to say, you've created pyramid energy before, what are you going to do tomorrow? I partly feel like me coming on to do this recording is a form of rebellion. I feel like it's a form of rebellion, just coming on as myself to say the things that are on my mind as a reader, because yes, it's Halloween. A lot of readers are like me. A lot of readers come on, switch on their container to perform. I'm not saying that every single reading of mine is a performance, but in a sense it is. And I'm giving this kind of, I'm sharing this in this confused form because, you know, it is what it is. As soon as I switch on my recording and I say, hello to you all and welcome to Pyramid Energy, I'm telling you, something else has taken over. Something else has taken over, and that voice and that tone is just simply not the same voice and tone that I had with my friend that I was sitting at a coffee table with, you know, shooting the breeze last week. There are times where pyramid energy shows up in the conversation, having coffee with a friend, and then I see the friend's face like sort of get sucked into the energy unconsciously, and I'm aware of what's taking place. I see this happen with my sisters, with my mother. You know, I see it happen and I allow it. But I'm just saying that there's a lot more pressure in performance than there is in real life. And I've come on here to share the human, the human, fallible version of me, and to say that the totally integrated version of a human being only exists in the form of God, which is also a form that can only be experienced outside of the flesh. We are all human. We are all human beings living through a human experience. And so be very careful as you listen to readers, because yes, we are all superhuman. But when you are listening to a reader, that reader is still packaged in a pound of flesh, okay? A few pounds of flesh. And so you cannot abdicate your responsibility of freedom and choice and direction to a reader, because they also have to continuously integrate the wisdom that they're coming upon, work through their own doubts, question their own direction, question their own integrity of their own work, or not question it. You know, this is a choice to integrate or not to integrate, to work with integrity or not to work with integrity. They don't bring these questions to the container. We don't bring these questions to the container. to put this into context, let me also say, and this is not an attack on love readings again, but let's say the human being who comes to channel love readings might be a highly evolved human being who chooses to teach information that doesn't nurture the opportunity for integration in listeners. Or they could be a reader who in their personal life has not done the integration to recognize that they themselves are reading out of a loop. As a listener, we are not privy to all of that. What I will say to you, which is very reliable, is that your God self will never forsake you. Your God self is always trying to meet you in the middle, okay? Through every single experience, through every single reading you listen to, through every single interaction. And so embrace these opportunities. Even in the times you feel lost, just recognize that, if you stand still for a moment and look around you, just remember you're surrounded by a whole lot of other human beings that are going through a similar experience. Otherwise, this YouTube experience can start to feel the way a lot of us see Instagram, where you're just scrolling and looking at people's lives as this like model of perfection and what you aspire to become and all of that. And you're forgetting that it's all curated. It's all curated. Every single YouTube channel to a level is curated. You don't really get to see what happens when the YouTube reader who's excellent, who has 500 million followers, what they actually are dealing with when they're brushing their teeth and looking into the mirror. You're not privy to that experience. You're privy to the growth. You're privy to the performance. You're privy to the success, because where they are not successful, you don't get to hear about it. The other thing about right and wrong that I'd like to touch on is that what is right and what is wrong can change. And it changes according to what you need. It doesn't change according to some, let's say, idea of God that judges what is right and what is wrong. I've found that idea can leave you feeling trapped and without options. Because then there are things you want that cannot be accommodated within those constraints. And somewhere along the way, you realize that you're the only one standing in your way, because nobody else is telling you that it is wrong, it is right, but you, okay? You're the only judge of that. And then what happens? You watch people doing things you want to do, feeling free doing them, and you're not doing them. You also watch people telling you this X thing is wrong, and then a month later they're doing it. And then in that case, the only person you can really be upset with is yourself, because they're long gone. They've changed their mind, found a new truth, and they're gone. In a sense, I'd like to describe these times that we go through where we're upset with life. We're upset with our circumstances and the way things are happening around us, to us. I'm starting to see this, at least in this moment, almost as a rebellion against our freedom. Because to really embrace your freedom means you need to make a choice, means you need to really look at yourself, means you really need to accept what you want, means you really need to break the rules you created for yourself, all of that stuff. And the idea that who you're going to be tomorrow or what you'll create tomorrow is up to you. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of responsibility. Many times I have just relinquished that responsibility and been like, yeah, whatever's in the cards for me, or I'm surrendering to God's plan. The more you move into God's plan and the deeper you go into touching God's plan for you, the more you realize you are the plan. It is so ironic. And the craziest thing about it is the more freedom you embrace, at least for my archetype that I'll speak for, like the kind of person I am, the way I operate and the way I process, the more freedom I have, the more scattered I'm inclined to become. And so this whole thing is pretty much about finding a balance and having compassion on yourself around your comfort levels, your appetite for your speed of growth, because who you want to become is actually available within the hour. It really is available within the hour. It's just you that freaks out because that feeling of morphing and changing and just becoming someone else is quite scary. And I suppose that is the real reason many of us perform. When I say perform, I'm not looking down on it. I'm not presenting it as something inauthentic that we do. Okay? It's not, performing is not a show of inauthenticity. Performing, rather, I'd like to describe as the stage that we create to be whoever we actually feel we are in that moment. And when we step off that stage that we've created, that container we've created, when we step off of it is when we have to actually do sort of like the reverse version of performing. What people refer to as normal and authentic is actually that pretense of behaving like we're capable of less than we are, acting smaller than we are. Because in a sense, Gontse, the person who walks around Johannesburg or hangs out with other people physically, getting to know other people, introduces herself anew to other people, that version of me tends to hide what I do here on Pyramid Energy. Here on Pyramid Energy is when I'm performing, here is when I'm most free. And so in a sense, I feel like I'm taking this idea of imposter syndrome and turning it over to say that what we're afraid will happen as we become is a fear of ourselves, is a fear that it is actually great, that who we could become scares us, okay? And part of the reason why it scares us and that resistance to getting there is because that version of us that we are unbecoming risks becoming obsolete. And so, it resists the change. It brings to mind this idea of jumping, from one side of a mountain, I suppose, to another, or one cliff to another. You're scared of that gap in between. And so you can sort of see where you're going to land, and you need to go because the mountain behind you is starting to disappear. And in a sense, a person can also start growing tired of constantly having to jump. But if you understand why it is you're jumping and you get used to the idea that you know how to jump and that you're a great jumper, then you just get used to the idea of jumping and accepting who you're becoming and accepting that you need to keep shedding because it's really uncomfortable to remain the person that you are, especially when you know that the only reason you haven't jumped is you, not the gap. I'm finished with this now, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to post it. I'll figure out how. I didn't think I was going to speak for an hour. I knew I had a lot to get off my chest, and I'm grateful for your time. If you have any comments or questions about anything I've said, I'd really be interested to hear. Sending you all so much love.